Well, hello everyone. James Dalla here from TruthBeKnown. Welcome to episode 4. Last time we spoke, we had mentioned about jumping ahead to episode 17, The Cost of War. And we are preparing that episode. But due to some recent actions by Radiant Church attempting to silence us, we've decided to spend time putting together a precursory episode prior to The Cost of War. This will be a multi-chapter entitled Knowing the Enemy. And chapter 1 will be The Motive. Has anyone figured out why Pastor Lee Cummings and his Radiant leadership continues to make this situation so adversarial? Pastor Lee and Radiant's leadership have failed to follow any biblical process or wisdom in this situation. And through their own actions, they have not only been the instigators, but the aggressors, as well as the escalators. Why not answer and disclose rather than obstruct and harass? And why is it that the more we dig into things, the more questions are raised by what we find? Why can't they do something so simple, such as providing full financial transparency and the 2016 bylaws to we the church who have donated the money that has funded their operations? Why is this request so terrifying that instead of doing the right thing, they have instead responded with personal attacks against me and TruthBeKnown, and taken actions that can only be reasonably interpreted as attempts to silence us? In our view, this behavior is so egregious that it not only continues to harm the reputation of the church, it's also doing great damage to the reputations of the biblical elders in failing to be above reproach. And is placing their very qualifications to serve in ministry into question. Before we begin, I want to be clear that we at TBK are unable to make any statement of fact as to the motives of Radiant Church's leadership or the intent of their actions, but we will eventually find out. In the interim, we simply want to summarize Radiant's actions to date in response to our simple requests for financial transparency. Let's take a brief overview. Number 1, Pastor Lee informs me that God told him to come see me. And when he came and saw me, he asked for financial support for the downtown city center. Upon sharing my concerns privately, per step 1 of the Matthew 18 process, he flies off the handle. When he calms down, he does agree to follow up with me in a meeting. But then as I reach out to him, he goes MIA in response to my multiple phone calls and text messages. Number 2, upon contacting Elder Paul Orley and inquiring about appraisals on the properties, he responds that he doesn't see all the numbers. Upon restating his response, and that his response brings me even more concern, he becomes immediately defensive and agitated and says that I'm trying to put words in his mouth. Number 3, upon my request to meet with the entire board of elders without Pastor Lee's attendance, due to his behavior of flying off the handle in my office, the board decided to hire an attorney and write me a letter from hell throwing me out of the church. Something the Bible tells us not to do. Number 4, Paul Orley, elder, reaches out to another Radiant Church affiliate who knows me to inquire if he's heard what James Dally is up to, and then goes on to state, when you're in revival, the devil's going to come at you. Number 5, Pastor Lee's assistant, Krista Kennedy, reaches out to another Radiant Church affiliate who knows me and asks if he has heard from James Dally lately, and then goes on to state that the board took care of him. Number 6, I reach out to Radiant Overseer Tom Lane, who has spoken prophetic word over me multiple times during the presbytery at Radiant, requesting a time to discuss some concerns with Radiant's leadership. Tom would not take my call, and so I had a pastor in Texas that I have supported over the years, and who also knows Tom very well, to give him a call on my behalf as a character reference and attempt to broker the call. Tom refused and attacked me by sending me Bible verses that were mischaracterized and called me a factious man. Now, Tom Lane is currently finding himself in a little hot water over all the meltdown at Gateway Church between the alleged cover-up of the senior pastor, Robert Morris, who allegedly raped a 12-year-old girl while he was married with a son. And now he's being sued for the alleged financial fraud of not sending a certain percentage of the church's money to missions as they had publicized or promised to the congregation. This entire situation is one more alarm bell as to why Radiant needs to be fully transparent with their financials. Not just the allegations against Gateway Church, but the fact that Radiant Church is so closely tied to Gateway Church. Am I saying guilt by association? No. I'm saying that it's time for transparency with God's purse. And this is another example of exactly why. Well, Radiant would never do that, some would say. I didn't say that they did. But I bet there were plenty of people at Gateway who said the same thing, that Gateway would never do that either. So do we walk forward ignorantly or with the knowledge that we should trust but verify our leadership? Number 7, we form TruthBeKnown and send a letter to Radiant Church from 5 couples requesting the financials per step number 3 of the Matthew 18 process. And they deflect us by informing us that we're not the correct type of member per the bylaws. But they won't show us the bylaws because they state that they're afraid we're going to weaponize the bylaws against them. Number 8, we contact the ECFA and inquire them to provide us the audited financials. And after having to combat false claims by Radiant's leadership to the ECFA, that's right. Number 1, they informed the ECFA that they had already provided them to us, which was false. And then number 2, they informed the ECFA that we never requested them in writing, which was also false. We had actually requested them in writing multiple times, one of which their own attorney admitted to. Number 9, we engaged an independent accounting firm to perform an open analysis of the financials that were finally obtained from our placing pressure on the ECFA and sent this report to Radiant Leadership. Radiant Leadership chose not to respond to this accounting review letter that was sent. That was sent to each and every one of them independently via FedEx. Simply seeking questions to significant financial discrepancies in Radiant's financial reporting. Number 10, the entire Radiant leadership then chose not to respond to our going to the church and confronting them per step 3 of the biblical Matthew 18 process in our TBK videos. Number 11, Radiant Church's leadership then chose not to respond to the inquiry from their own legal counsel, that's right, who inquired about reconciliation in our situation. Now think of it. A church leadership that is not interested in reconciliation. That's what I said. And stay tuned, as I'm going to give you more on the situation later in this episode, and you're not going to want to miss this. Number 12, and then as I was warned, Radiant Church then commences character assassination against me by stating that I was a disgruntled contractor who bid on the city center project and did not get it. And now I'm seeking to take Pastor Lee down. As I communicated with all of you in the last episode, this is not true. It is a totally fabricated lie. This is nothing more than an attack on my character, defamation, slander, bearing false witness, and outright breaking of the 9th commandment by Radiant. Does everyone here get to the point of how serious this is? Man, I hope so. Then when we're thinking it couldn't get any worse, it does. Radiant's leadership, number 13, specifically Rick Burmeister, goes and contacts the accountant that prepared the letter from the independent accounting firm. That's right. But instead of offering answers to the questions, he said Radiant would have to take action since the letter was posted on the TruthBeKnown's website. And then Rick had Radiant's legal counsel send a letter to the accounting firm as well, asking for the video to be removed. Our accountant employee was quite upset by the phone call from Rick and told us that the call made her very uncomfortable. Well, of course it did. Radiant's leadership has been made aware of the letter of questions from our accounting firm for many months, but only called when the letter was actually disclosed to the congregation publicly. And even then, Radiant's leadership provided no answers, but instead simply attempted to have the video and the letter taken down. What other purpose could Rick have had in mind in making that call other than to harass our accountant and silence the accounting firm she worked for? This call was completely inappropriate, and Rick Burmeister should be ashamed for making it. So we at TBK ask you, what do you feel the motives could be for all this behavior we just listed? Or could there even perhaps be an ulterior motive to all of this? Given the fact that all 13 of these actions are in contrast to the Bible, clearly go against the Word of God, and broke the 9th commandment, do any of you find a reflection of anything worthy in the representation of Jesus Christ? Does any of this build up the church and protect the congregation? Or does it appear to protect leadership by attacking us and deflecting questions to prevent them from being held accountable? And what were we asking for again? Financial transparency and the 2016 bylaws? So let me get my head around this. Those two simple requests have caused a church to commit all of those ungodly actions? We at TBK are in the middle of this, and we're still having a hard time processing it. And what's even more baffling is the amount of you who are still supporting, defending, and standing with this leadership. What is up with that? That's probably even more concerning. And it's truly astonishing that Radiant leadership can perpetuate this long list of ungodly behavior, yet they can't do something so simple as providing the full financial transparency and a copy of the bylaws that governs the operations of the church. Or even if they chose not to exhibit the transparency, which they didn't, why not simply decline and deny our request for transparency with discretion and in a peaceful manner, instead of responding as they did in an aggressive and vindictive way? Proverbs 15:1, a soft word turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Pastor Lee portrays himself as being extremely knowledgeable of the Bible. But knowledge is worthless without the wisdom for its application and actually walking it out. That is not so easy. So what's the difference in repeating biblical knowledge unaccompanied by the action of walking it out? Nothing. It's also dead. James 2:17 through 23. Faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. This is where we need to be fruit inspectors of anyone in leadership. How is their leadership and how is their relationship with their wife, their kids, others? Is it a reflection of Christ, or is it a toxic environment? A work environment where if someone asks questions about a leader's actions, for example, other staff responds to that staffer, that's not a mountain you want to die on. Again, saying great things is easy. Repeating the wisdom of the Bible can make anyone appear intelligent or strong, but walking it out is much different. Again, that's not so easy for many people. And if you screw up and sin in a leadership position, it takes a leader to stand up and own it and repent, truly repent, and move forward embittered from it. But what do we see in most churches across the country lately coming out? We see that the ministry failed to properly address it and actually tried to cover it up like a bunch of cowards. Cases in point: Mike Bickle, Robert Morris, Mark Driscoll. Listen, it's not who you are in the pulpit that matters most, but who you are in the privacy of your home or when you're being confronted and your actions. And you can no longer have your henchmen deal with the situation, and you can no longer hide yourself. I have no need to throw stones. I speak in truth and knowledge when I tell you that from my personal experience with Pastor Lee Cummings and his specific dealings with TBK and myself, he has not exhibited the traits of a spiritual leader that we should have hoped to have seen. Let me drive it home for you, for those of you who have an ear. I submitted myself and my family to him as my spiritual authority or spiritual father for 13 years. For 13 years, I supported his ministry. He seeks me out and informs me that God told him to come see me, and that I'm a top 5 giver per his ranking. When I communicate, not confront, but communicate my financial concerns in a private meeting, he flies off the handle, stands up over me, and is yelling. Am I questioning his integrity? While I remain seated and not expecting, but being prepared for his response of anger that others warned me about, I then went from communicating to confronting him on his ungodly behavior. I told him that I was warned that he would attack my character. So I pointed to his phone in his hand and said, you might as well get to it now. You might as well get a hold of your board of elders right now and tell them that I'm the bad guy in the situation. I'm told that's what you do. And he looked at me. And then as I wait for a response, he actually has an out-of-body experience and starts to weep and cry like a small child. So I fall from his grace, man's grace, of being his rated top 5 giver, to be thrown out of the church at the snap of his fingers? The man who wanted to be my spiritual father, of whom I submitted to, orphans me? Flat out orphans me when I ask some simple questions of financial transparency? I didn't make any inflammatory accusations. I simply asked some questions. And those questions pushed some buttons that caused him to explode instantly outside of the fruits of the Spirit. You may say, well, that's weird, James. You must have said something inflammatory that you're not telling us. I wish that was the case, but it's not. You are probably saying, well, there must be more to this. And we very well think that there is. But I do want to state that an orphan can't be a father, especially someone operating in an orphan spirit. I want to take a sidebar here and discuss the concept of kind found in the Bible, where it repeatedly states that living creatures produce after their own kind. They can only produce offspring that belong to the same basic category. In this category of being an orphan can't be a father because he doesn't know how to be a father. But he so longs to be a father. He may actually even reach out and request to be someone's spiritual father, but he doesn't know how to be a father. And so he gets frustrated. And so regardless, he eventually ends up making the spiritual son or daughter an orphan. And when I attempted to apply the biblical dispute model of Matthew 18, the model the Bible commands us to use, Pastor Lee and his leadership ignored it and then hid. And then sure enough, here comes the letter from hell, like a sucker punch from the back of the room to the back of the head, bearing false claims and threats. And we have since learned Radiant's leadership then began their character assassination attempts, fueled by lies of slander and defamation against me, falsely claiming that I was a disgruntled contractor who was now trying to take Pastor Lee down. And what was the motive for all of this behavior from Pastor Lee and his leadership? To tell me no? To get me to go away? To wound me? Perhaps to punish me for questioning his authority? And that he is going to teach me and others like me a lesson? It kind of appears that way, in my opinion. Let's look at the definition of a motive. It's the reason for doing something, especially one that is hidden and not obvious. Proverbs 16, 1 through 3 says, God weighs and examines the motives and intents of the heart. 1 Samuel 16, 7. But the Lord says to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see man as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Proverbs 21, 2 through 3. A person may think that their ways are right, but the Lord weighs the heart. What would drive a senior pastor, his executive pastor, Rick Burmeister, his entire board of elders, as well as all of his overseers, to all be complicit in writing such an ungodly communication to a congregational member whom they were seeking additional financial support from, when that member was simply asking for some financial transparency? Elders who are to be above reproach, who should be living according to higher standards, and whom will be judged more strictly, have written one of the most vicious communications I think I have ever witnessed. They are all complicit and responsible for this letter, and they have had years to walk it back. But instead of walking it back, they have not only been committed to acting even more indignant by disgracefully standing behind it. Now, it has been recommended that we take the time to read this letter from hell so that everyone can see its divisive, vindictive, and accusatory tone from its authors. And I say that as plural. This letter was clearly written outside of the fruits of the Spirit. Luke 6:45, for the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. I had initially assumed that the attorney had just written this scathing letter by himself, but I was very surprised to find out from that attorney that this was not the case. This letter was not a knee-jerk verbal response or a quick Facebook hit job. This letter was premeditated, planned, and it took some time for many in Radiant's leadership to develop it. That's what I said. We're going to post a letter from hell on the screen and would like to request that you read and follow along if you're able to. There is just something in this letter that can actually be seen and not only heard while reading it. Mr. Daly, please be advised that Middlebrook Goodspeed, PLLC, serves as legal counsel for Radiant Church. We have been made aware of a certain written demand for specific church records. We have also been made aware of your prior and more recent inappropriate conduct and/or communications in relation to, at a minimum, church leadership. First, this correspondence serves as a written confirmation of your obvious status as a non-member of the church. To clarify, the church's articles of incorporation, restated and otherwise, created two classes of membership. Number one, governing members with voting rights, and two, congressional members with no voting rights or other corporate authority. Consistent with all applicable Michigan law, the church's bylaws, amended, restated, and otherwise, establish the requirements for being deemed an active, non-voting congressional member. By any standard, you do not meet these minimum requirements. Accordingly, consistent with Michigan law and the church's bylaws, you are considered a non-member of the church. We hope and pray that you will find a church that serves your needs and expectations. Second, your improper and inappropriate written demand for church records is hereby denied in full. Within the two classes of church membership, the governing members of the church possessing corporate voting rights and the other corporate authority under applicable law are the church's directors. All other members of the church, those satisfying the minimum membership requirements set forth in the church's bylaws, are congregational members with no corporate voting rights or other corporate authority under applicable law. Furthermore, the church's bylaws are clear that any director or officer of the church may inspect church records upon proper written notice as set forth by the bylaws. You are not a director of the church. You are not an officer of the church. And even if you were a non-voting congressional member of the church, which you are not, you have no corporate authority or right to demand any such church records. Your reliance on the Michigan Nonprofit Corporation Act is entirely misplaced, misunderstood, and misapplied here. The applicable statutory provision related to inspection of records applies only to a shareholder or member. Michigan Nonprofit Corporation Act, MCL 450-2487. A member means a person that has a membership in a corporation in accordance with the provisions of its articles of incorporation or bylaws. MCL 450-2108. Emphasis added. As explained above, the church's governing documents are clear that the corporate members of the church with voting rights and other corporate authority vested in them through applicable law are the governing members, directors. Your written demand for such church records is therefore denied, consistent with applicable Michigan law and the church's governing documents. We would gladly discuss and explain same with the Michigan Department of Attorney General should the church ever be requested to explore this topic with them. Third, this correspondence shall serve as your written notice to you to cease and desist from any other attempted communication with the church in person, by written or electronic correspondence, or in any other format or medium. All further communication you wish to have with the church should be directed to me at Stephen@MGLawTeam or his phone number. This cease and desist notification does not apply to other members of the Daly family. Fourth, this correspondence serves to remind you that the church and all church campuses are private property. Accordingly, the church hereby formally revokes its consent for you to be on any church campus, property, and or places where church events, functions, meetings, or services of any kind are being held in any manner. All other members of the Daly family are and remain welcome at the church, as this revocation of consent applies only to you. If you have a personal liability rider on your homeowner's insurance policy and or umbrella liability insurance, you should provide them with a copy of this letter. If you harass the church or otherwise refuse to abide by the terms of this notice, this firm may contact law enforcement, take legal action against you, and seek to recover from you personally as well as against all available insurance policies if and as necessary and appropriate. This shall serve as your first and only written notice regarding the matters described herein. In the event you choose to ignore this notice and continue to engage in the above described activities or conduct, immediate action may be taken if and as necessary and appropriate. Sincerely, Stephen Goodspeed for the firm. So, was that unhinged letter of threats really called for when all I was requesting was a meeting with the entire board in reference to financial transparency? And secondarily, due to Pastor Lee's behavior in my office? What do you feel the motive or motives were in sending me such a letter as that? Do you feel that that letter was really necessary in response to my request to meet or receive financial transparency from the board? Why did they feel so threatened that they not only went against the word of God, but acted in a way that even non-Christians are finding unacceptable? Now, I have to comment that when a non-Christian is the voice of reason in the room of a bunch of Christians, I think those Christians have a problem. Why the letter of hell instead of a simple, diplomatic, but kind communication declining our requests? It seems that would have been so simple, taken less effort, and they wouldn't have had to engage legal counsel and wasted somebody's tithe on the expense of the legal fees. At least one plausible answer for a motive in lashing out like this is that someone has something very serious to hide and needed to unleash a communication so strong, so divisive, so threatening, a communication that had to be successful in causing me to go away. But of course, we don't know the answer because Radiant's leadership has refused to be transparent. But it is hard to imagine how someone could arrive at a different conclusion as to their motive. I've made you aware of many tactics in our earlier video communications, and I want to share yet another to help open your eyes as to what we're dealing with. The format of this letter can be summed up into a tactic known as DARVO. The definition of DARVO is a reaction by perpetrators in response to their being called accountable for their wrongdoing. The acronym stands for deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. It is a very effective, most of the time, unless you'll replay your hand. Acting more confidently than they should because they believe they're in a stronger position than they actually are. This is what happens when they operate in the flesh, outside of God's wisdom and direction. They have become blind to the truth. And to those looking inward for the glass, their behavior appears foolish and reprobate. This letter was meant to be a sharp arrow and is what we call a shot over the bow. It's an act of war that we had noted in an earlier episode, but something that we will fully explain in our next episode, the cost of war. Unfortunately, this letter has served several purposes. First of which, it's an indictment to the authors, which are Pastor Lee and his entire leadership consisting of his elders and his overseers. Lastly, this writing makes these men canon authors. This is where a writer's work is considered influential, significant, and a representative of a period of time, a special period of time that we believe we will all be looking back to as when the dysfunctional and unbiblical one-man model church began its final approach and descent, ushering us back into the fivefold ministry model prescribed by our Creator. Now that we've read the letter, we would like to briefly address some of the statements in this letter. First, we are looking forward to the explanation of their claim to my prior and recent inappropriate conduct and/or communications with the church leadership. I must comment that I find it beyond ironic that they're making this statement within their letter from hell, a letter that represents the most inappropriate conduct and communication many of us have ever witnessed from a church. In contrast, I have been very transparent with all of my communications, that being with Pastor Lee in both person meetings and also a phone call with Paul Orley, and all my emails with Elder Rick Burmeister. None of my communications have been improper or inappropriate conduct in any fashion or format, and I find this claim false, unsubstantiated, and gaslighting, and nothing less than bearing false witness again. and breaking of the ninth commandment. Next, we find it very interesting that they admit in writing to have created a two-tier membership structure at Radiant Church, that being governing members with voting rights and congressional members with no voting rights or other corporate authority. So a member of the congregation, a congregational member, a giving unit, remember that term, has no voting rights or corporate authority. Is that true? We at TBK are committed to finding out where these corporate church procedures were derived from. Did Lee learn these ungodly methods from Dwayne Vanderklok of Resurrection Life in Granville, Lee's spiritual father, and that of whom trained him as a church plant and placed him into his own Resurrection Life Church in Richland? Was this corporate garbage learned from his leadership? Or was this learned from Mark Driscoll of Mars Hill, of whom Lee brought in during a Rise Shine conference and gave him accolades? Or perhaps was it Jimmy Evans and Tom Lane of Gateway? After all, Tom Lane did author the book, Healthy Church Government. As stated before, we plan to do a full video on this book. We at TBK are going to get to the bottom of all of this ungodliness and embracement of the world's corporate systems and their application and implementation into the church at large to achieve what? The Great Commission? How? These systems are used in the corporate world for a man or entity to build a name unto oneself. And it is our strong opinion that they have no place in the Church of Jesus Christ, where leadership is to be that of a shepherd or a servant, where their actions should parallel that of which is required biblically, and their vision being as many as possible come into the salvation of Jesus Christ, not an empire unto oneself or their ministry brand. Romans 12:2, Paul said, "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is." So even though Paul clearly tells us this, many pastors in the global church today seem to run to the ways of the world. They ask business people to be on their board of elders, and they adopt the systems of corporate America on how to run their organization, and then even have the audacity to franchise the gospel, make it their own brand, profiteer from it to the point of making themselves millionaires, and then stand up and allow those in their congregation to put them on a pedestal to be addressed as the founder and great one, sucking in the accolades of man just like Satan did. And when they are questioned, they state to be careful, do not touch God's anointed. And if someone questions too much, that person might be thrown out of their church. Wow. Back to the letter, they next state that their stance is consistent with the church's bylaws, amended, restated, or otherwise. Unfortunately, this claim is very problematic because they are not willing to disclose the bylaws. So we are not able to confirm this claim. As we shared earlier, they have communicated through their legal counsel that they're actually afraid to provide the bylaws and that we might weaponize them against the church leadership. So they inform us that the bylaws state that we are not the right kind of member, but then they refuse to provide the bylaws as we might use them against them. Is this another example of a reprobate mind? A total loss of logic coupled with anxiety and paranoia? Lastly, their counsel cleverly states the bylaws, as amended, restated, or otherwise, as if they're leaving the door open for their ability for them to modify the bylaws to best suit their position. Well, unfortunately for them, their legal counsel furnished an affidavit from Rick Burmeister stating under oath, that being written testimony, that the 2016 bylaws have not, I restate, have not been amended. It is their actions of foolishness like this that continues to undermine their pathetic position of defiance, that they do not need to be transparent with God's purse, that somehow they have diplomatic immunity from heaven and will not be held accountable by anyone. That is a very arrogant and precarious position to place oneself in or find someone standing in. Proverbs 16:18 through 19. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Next they state, they hope and pray that I will find a church that serves my needs and expectations to be very disingenuous. As I don't think they're really hoping or praying, given the tone of this letter. They may have been hoping and praying that I or the situation would go away and not escalate, but that is not in their control any longer. They have had 4 years to do what is right. We have given them so many opportunities to do the right thing. And to re-clarify, all we were looking for was simple financial transparency from our church, a church that we trusted and submitted to, and I personally gave financially to for 13 years. But apparently that was too much to ask, even though it was predicated on them to ask me for more money. I feel defrauded, and that what they had portrayed the ministry as being is not what I have discovered it to be. Frankly, there is almost no fruit. In addition, I don't think I've ever heard of someone getting kicked out of a church. Have you? But yet at Radiant Church, it seems to be a common occurrence. Literally a corporate procedure should anyone question God's so-called anointed. Especially a request to see the financials and bylaws, something that is readily provided by many denominational churches. So they feel so threatened by my verbal and written requests for simple financial transparency that they serve me a cease and desist. Again, this seems to be very overly aggressive and far-reaching, overreaching, and even an overreacting response for simply asking for some financial transparency that many churches willfully provide. And I say it again, they could have just kindly responded with the bylaws and pointed out that I was the wrong type of member diplomatically. And that would have hurt, but would have probably sufficed. But no, they had to, metaphorically speaking, toss a grenade in my lap with the hope that I would, as well as the other members of TBK, be wounded and go away. And when we didn't, they apparently began their character assassination campaign. So they attack me, my character, and attempt to divide my family by stating twice in the letter from hell that my family is still welcome to attend, but I am not. So why is that stated twice? Why the overemphasis that my family is still welcome to attend? Surely, given that there were several authors to this letter, I don't think this was a typo. But given my discussion with their attorney, Stephen Goodspeed, I also don't think this was an editing error. They carefully crafted this letter to be all it could be, to ensure its effectiveness. And given the malicious tone of this letter, it seems obvious to me that this statement about my family was nothing more than an attempt to sow seeds of dissension within my own family. Now that is very dark and sinister. And obviously, it sure seems like the added attempt to also punish me, right, for inquiring for the financial information. And why was this again? Because Pastor Lee stated that God told him to come see me in his request for more financial support for the downtown city center. And because the senior pastor, Lee Cummings, blew up yelling in my office, and I wanted to meet with the entire board of elders without him there to discuss his behavior. So because of this, they write me this letter of hell and try to cause division in my family? Let's be honest. I don't like drama or embellishment of an issue. I don't. I have no tolerance for it. But there are many families that this could have caused significant issues to, and perhaps even marital problems, including separation or divorce. The outcome really came down to how stable my family and marriage was. When church leadership throws someone out or attacks them, they need to understand that they're not just impacting the immediate individuals. They're also impacting their entire family and lineage. It is putting them at risk at losing a lot of friends and relationships that they have built over the years. It takes a lot of investment to make friendships and relationships. And who else do we know that likes to attack the family? Exactly. It's creating a situation where the rest of my family has to decide whether or not they're going to stand with their father or husband for principle and truth and transparency, or continue to submit to Radiant Church's leadership, turn cheek to this ungodliness, and to avoid the risk of losing their relationships that are so dear to them. How could their proposition be healthy for any family? And why go this far unless you are really trying to take me out? What could be so damning in those financials that they had to pull out all of the steps in this letter from hell to ensure that they literally, physically, and spiritually took me out? Next, I'm confused why I would be contacting all of my insurance companies as they note. I'm confused why they would be calling law enforcement, as I've made no threats. I am confused as to what legal action they would take against me. I am confused as to what damages they would seek to recover from me personally or from my insurance policies. It all sounds to us like an attempt to bully me and to silence me. And I'd like to know what you have to think about it. I will say, the affidavits are stacking up in reference to the false statements being made about me. Specifically, Radiant's leadership spreading a lie that I'm a disgruntled contractor who bid on the city center project, didn't get it, and became bitter, and am now attempting to take Pastor Lee down. This is an entirely false narrative, right down to the lie that I bid on the city center project. I did not. I didn't even know if Radiant was seeking bids on the project. I was not involved at all on that project until Pastor Lee came asking me to donate more money in support of the project. I am assembling written testimony about this lie. So in retrospect, I hope those who have perpetrated this false witness against me have insurance for themselves and their businesses for such defamatory statements. Proverbs 29:6. Evil people fall into their own traps. Good people run the other way, glad to escape, right? And if they didn't make themselves clear enough in their letter, they warn me yet again at the closing of their letter that they may take immediate action. So I ask all of you again, why such a nasty letter of malice? All because I made in their definition improper and inappropriate demands for financial documentation? I have to say that if some third party told me this story and I wasn't experiencing it directly myself, I'm not sure I'd believe it. It would sound like a bunch of wolves in sheep's clothing to me, imposters, literally modern day Pharisees operating in the flesh, the ways of man, acknowledging that there is a God, but denying his power, and never truly knowing him, therefore not having fear of him. But listen to this. Seeking alignment with him to obtain what that has to offer them in the natural. That which they are incapable of going out and earning on their own in the corporate world. That being position, power, and money. Many pastors will admit from the pulpit that they have absolutely no skills. And that's why most pastors stop being pastors, end up as salesmen. And if someone has the skills of a salesman, then you're probably being sold from their current position that they hold. The question is, are you being sold truth? And are you just trusting? Or are you trusting and verifying? This will conclude chapter number 1. Please join us for chapter number 2 of Knowing the Enemy, entitled Breaking Rank, Divide and Conquer. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon. Well, that's a wrap, Mario. I tell you what, you do a great job with that camera. I don't know how you learned to do all that. But listen, I got to ask you a question. I know we're family, but that money's missing from episode 3. And you know how I am about trust but verify. Listen, don't take it personal. I just want to kind of take a look. Mario. I better look in here too. Mario! I'm telling you, when it comes to money, everybody changes.